everybody. Critical Conversations, episode 13. Today we have a guest, Peter. Welcome to the show.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, so we'll get into who Peter is and what we're going to talk about in a minute. But first, we want to jump into some news really quick. If you're new to the show, Critical Conversations is a show where we try to work through some political or cultural or news items in a way that is productive. We're trying to get away from the narrative-driven, partisan sort of talking points and really sit down and have real conversations. So if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. We're going to talk about the political systems today and the two-party divide versus like a more parliamentary, multiple parties forms of government, stuff that I don't really know a lot about. And we'll hopefully learn a lot together. So
I'm Jared Bessie, and that's been Sam Castles. We're joined by Peter Binion. Peter's laughing. He listens to the show, so he's like, I know this rigmarole, this intro. And so Peter's my roommate, and we're happy to have him on. He's just going to be chiming in. So
yeah, it's going to be good. We're going to jump into some quick news. Yes. We don't have a lot this week. I'll talk about some COVID news, and then I'll throw it to Jared for a few quick election updates, like very minor stuff. But
perfect.
So something that's been in the headlines recently is a couple of companies, Pfizer, I think is how you say it, and
I think so.
That Moderna has also been announcing that their preliminary tests for their vaccines have shaped out to be about 90 to, I think Moderna said 94.5% effective, which is great news. Obviously, there's some more like weeds to be dug into as to like, is this applicable for all age groups or how long does it last and all of that. But I even saw a piece in Forbes that was saying some of the early stuff was saying that the immunity from the vaccine could last years or more. So, that's all good news. We'll see how much it actually shapes out. But I was always curious, like, how could they know it could last more than a year when COVID's been around, like, not that long? So, but I'm sure they have mad science to speed it up or something like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it sounds like we're hopefully by the end of the year they'll have like one approved, and then it'll be rolling out early in the spring, probably for people that need it, and then maybe by late next summer we'll have it more universal.
Right.
So we'll see. I don't know, but it's good news because cases are on the rise, and we need some hope.
Very high right now.
Yes,
to say the least.
Yes, worse than it's been in a while. So we do have some election news and updates. First, Trump still hasn't resigned yet, so that's exciting. I was reading through his tweets this morning, and they're very colorful.
Yes.
But I feel like most people at this point are pretty much resigned to President-elect Biden. I think, there's different, like, he started talking to heads of state and other places, and like it's gotten a little bit more official since when we last recorded. I'm sure there'll still be more talking points in the weeks to come. And it looks like all of the legal cases that the Trump administration attorneys from around the country have brought forward have all been pretty much dropped, and no big enough evidence at this point in time. So in the House, we have a few more results called. Last time we recorded, there was I think the Republicans had flipped 5 seats, or had flipped like 8 seats for a net game of 5 or something like that. But officially they've called it. So the Democrats did take it. They're at 221 right now. You need 218 to have a majority, but they continue to call more seats for the Republicans. And now there's been a plus 8 net gain, and there'll probably be even more. So that's still coming from the New York Times map that we looked at last time. So that's more big gains for the Republicans. And it looks like the toss-up districts are still mostly going to go towards the Republican candidates. So, but New York is taking a long time because they have to count their absentee ballots. That's going to take, it could be, the new year before we know some of these. I was reading today. So
true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks for breaking those down. Some news there. But yeah, all right. Well, we'll jump into the topic for today. I'm just going to kind of intro it, and then we'll sort of toss over to Peter and break down some of that. But basically, I've been thinking a lot about political parties, and here in America lately, our parties are more partisan than ever. It's sort of one of the reasons we wanted to start the show is to sort of figure out how do we have dialogues between parties and talk about these complicated issues in healthy ways. And favorability on both sides. Like it seems like if there's a Democrat in office, the Republicans will give them the lowest favorability marks possible.
Oh yeah,
and vice
just
versa.
horrid.
Yeah, it's everything is very split.
Well, and just trust in Congress in general is like abysmally low, you know.
Right. We're one of the few. I mean, I don't know about the few nations, but one of the few large nations that has such rigid two-party system. There's very few third-party candidates that hold office even in the House, like one or two.
Right.
And yeah, and knowing this and thinking back to George Washington's farewell address where he stepped down and he warned against parties and the dangers that they would cause. And he was very strong terms about it. He thought it could lead to despotism and how they would care more about trumping the other party and dominating the other party than what's good for the country. And yeah, that was chief on his mind way back then. And yet here we are, over 200 years later, and we're wrestling with this exact same thing that he worried about. So we're trying to sit down today, have a conversation about why the two-party system is so strong, so dominant in America, what some of these alternatives might be. And the good news is we have a lot of other countries in the world besides the U.S.
Wait,
easy
what?
to forget about all those other little countries out there. But believe it or not, they exist, and they don't have just Republicans versus Democrats over and over. So we're going to sit down. Peter himself has a little bit of experience or personal knowledge with that, and we'll have some discussions about pros and cons and what these structures look like. So yeah, Peter, what's your special knowledge on other governments?
Yeah, so as Sam said, I'm Peter, Jared's roommate, and I grew up in South Africa for my whole life up until college. And so my political background is a little mixed up because I grew up in South Africa, which has a parliamentary system. As a former British colony, they do a lot of former British colonies have parliaments because they're just copying the government of England and Britain. And so that was always a little weird. And then my parents, being American, we were always focused on, the American system and the congressional system and Republicans and Democrats and stuff like that. And so I kind of had a little bit of both. And so I have a little bit of experience with both systems. And so then when I came to the States for college, I went to Liberty University. And if you know anything about Liberty University, it's super political as well.
Wait, what?
And so, yeah, just a tad, just a little political. So, yeah, it was odd, being in South Africa. It's a very liberal country because they, if you know anything about South Africa, historically there was apartheid up until 1994, which was legalized segregation, and then after that they wrote a new constitution and Bill of Rights and everything. And so since the Constitution and Bill of Rights was formed in 1994, it's very liberal, lots of rights for everyone, socially very liberal and everything. And so I always thought I was super right of center. Just being in South Africa, I'm like, oh man, I'm like super far right wing. Then I went to Liberty and I realized I'm actually pretty dead center. I'm not actually right of center. And so, yeah, kind of put me in an interesting spot. So now I kind of lean more center right libertarian. But yeah, that's kind of my political background. But as Sam said, yeah, I can talk a little bit about parliaments and what they mean and what they do and how they work. I'll talk mainly about British Parliament just because that's the biggest one. I know about South African Parliament too. Each parliamentary system is slightly different, but Britain's the most well-known one. So I'll just kind of.
Can I interject? I was curious. So
Sure.
You mentioned the 1994 Bill of Rights. So
Sure.
Is it super long? Is it like, because they're right? Because I feel like Not like because I feel like if we were writing if we had to write the Constitution today or rewrite the Bill of Rights today, it would just be like, it would just be this massive undertaking, and I just didn't know if that was what happened.
Yeah, I mean, they had like their Bill of Rights or whatever they called it. They actually had like a system whereby people could just mail in their recommendations.
What?
Like
Okay.
any citizen could mail in their recommendation. They wouldn't add it, but they considered it, and that's why it's super liberal. So like the Constitution is not like super liberal, but more like the Bill of Rights, like gay rights, stuff like that. Very like there was no argument about that really. Stuff like gay rights and marriage and all those sorts of issues, like social issues, more liberal there, because it was just kind of an amalgamation of so many different people throwing ideas, and the government being like, yeah, we want freedom for everyone, and but yeah, the Constitution not as much. I think it's just more standard, what you would expect.
Outlining.
Yeah. But yeah, so a parliamentary system, I guess I can kind of compare it to what we have here, because people know what we have here, but I'm sure we'll get more into the weeds about what we have here after this too. But basically the main difference between Parliament and a Congress is that Parliament is basically formed of one main body, one main legislative body that also elects the executive or the prime minister. So it's all kind of one thing, even though, yes, in Britain they do have three levels. They have the House of Commons, the House of Lords, and then the Queen. The Queen only really acts on recommendation from the Prime Minister and doesn't do anything on her own. And the House of Lords can't actually create legislation, and they can't actually legislation, so they can only give recommendations to the House of Commons. So they'll get some sort of a law that gets passed, and then they'll say, actually, maybe you should amend this. And if the House of Commons says, no, we don't want to, then there's not really much that the House of Lords can do. They can do like certain things, like in very limited things maybe, but I couldn't really find a lot about like what those things were. Like, I think it has to be like really drastic for them to actually like, strike something down. But they can delay the process by sending it back. So they can send it back as many times as they want and delay the process, but they can't actually stop the legislation from happening.
So it kind of sounds more like the veto system we have here with the president, right? Kind of like, I feel like it's kind of like
they can't even veto it, right? They can't veto it. So as long as
they
want to keep sending it back, they can keep sending. I mean, so yes, they can technically veto it. I guess sending it back a bunch, but.
So are you saying the higher court is sending it back to the lower, or the higher parliament is sending it back to the lower parliament, but eventually the higher parliament has to act on what the lower parliament says?
Yep.
Whoa, that's really interesting.
It's weird. And the higher parliament is like way larger than the lower one.
That's what I was about to say. It's really big, right?
It's huge. And some of them are hereditary, which is also weird. So there's like 90 members of this, which is hereditary, which is a very British thing. You're born into this family, you get to be a lord. Well done. I don't know. But then, and then the other ones are just appointed by, honestly, I think by just the party and other people just appoint them. And so there's thousands or 800 or 900 or 1,000. I don't know, there's a ton of people in the House of Lords.
Right, because the voting is different from the people, right? Because they vote along party lines as opposed to voting along.
Yes.
Which is ironic because we feel like, it would be more more polarized and more party if you're voting for a party instead of for a candidate, but it ends up not working out that way. So that's interesting. Right,
because that's so the way that the House of Commons is elected is it's a representational system, right? They've split up Britain into 650 different small little areas, and each area gets to vote, and whichever party comes out on top will elect an MP or a member of parliament to represent that district.
Okay.
And so this means that there is, as Sam was saying, there's a lot more opportunity for smaller parties, because if I'm, a small party, I can target my district, and I can just go crazy in this small district out of 650, and I can get one seat, and I'll get a one seat in parliament if I win my district.
Right.
And so you end up with tons and tons of parties because they can all win small little things, but a lot of them don't have the resource to try and campaign all over, and so often they won't. They'll only win what they can get. But that often leads to the House of Commons being split and no party getting a majority. So a party will get a plurality often, but maybe not a majority. And that leads to people or parties having to make coalitions with other parties to maintain power, because one party has to have a majority of the seats. So 326 seats is a majority in the House of Commons.
That's what then gets the prime minister, right? So that's why you have to have
correct
have a majority.
Yeah. Right. So like Jared was saying, you vote on party lines. So a person, you vote for a party, and the party has a list of people that are in their party that are ranked, and kind of you go down the list, and whoever is high on the list, gets a seat, and then you go down, and if you won 320 seats, you go down to name 320 on the list, and that's how you sort it out. And I mean, that's one of the ways they'll sort it out. Sometimes, at least in South Africa, they've gotten better about trying to put a face to it and be like, if you elect us in this district, we're going to make so-and-so your MP. But I don't know how it is in Britain as much, but certain countries do it where they just have a list and they work down the list. And if you're 325 on the list and you only win 324 seats, then sorry, you're not going to be an MP this term.
Wow. Yeah, so that's really interesting you say that, because, all right, so let's say you said 600 something sections of Britain, 650 or something.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
So in America, we have the House, obviously, which has, what is it, Jared? It's 428?
Yes. No.
It's a lot.
Yes.
416.
It was 588.
Oh, it's more? I thought 214 was a majority. I can't.
435. 435.
435. All right.
Okay,
I was off. But anyway, so that seems like enough, small House districts that every now and then you would see a third party run, but we don't really have that here. Is it so maybe it's less because must be more structural stuff, like that party system, like you said, because you vote for a party, there's more emphasis on diversifying the party system, maybe. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think sorry, I'll go. So I think because we have such the coalition building happens at a different time, right? So I think the coalition building happens in America before you join a party, right? So if you want to win, you need the support of a party, and so you end up aligning to one of two parties so that you can get the majority. Whereas in a parliamentary system, you can be a small party and then get elected, and then you have to build a coalition with other parties. So I feel like there's kind of that extra level. Is that correct? Am I?
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, it is interesting though, because we did a simulation on this in my Congress class where everyone was a person or a party, and then it was okay, you have to get elected, and you have to get a majority in the classroom, and it ended up by the end of the game everyone's in one of two groups, and it's oh wait, how did this work? And it's okay, because you have to get people together if you want to win, and you want to hold if you want to hold the House, you have to get 50%. So you don't want to have all these libertarians or have all these people of the Green Party or whatever dragging you away from your 50%. Because that coalition building happens before instead of after you get into the system. But yeah, it is super interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense kind of on its face, where every year we have such close selections, the House and the Senate are really close, and the presidential election is close, because like you said, parties, they move and they compromise and shift as far as they are willing to like get those extra votes. So that's why we see, close elections bouncing back and forth, because the parties kind of shift with the way that people are voting.
Right.
Yeah. Seems like we're stuck with it.
Yeah, it's odd that like Britain, with like such a, I don't know, small landmass compared to the United States, split themselves up into 650 different districts, whereas the United States only splits themselves up into 438 or whatever. Which also, I guess, makes it more opportune for these smaller parties, because it means that you just have a smaller area to cover if you want to win. It's like, we just need this little village over here and we've won, basically. But
yeah, that's true.
Because in in America, like the average House representative, if you divide it out, like it's like 700,000 people. Each person in the House represents 700,000 people, which is wild when you think about it. Constituent. That's not, the Senate is even crazier. But yeah, when you think about in Britain, there's so much more representative of the actual place where they come, or like, there's such a smaller constituency base, which is really interesting. I often wonder like whether or not we should expand the House to get this like more, have less people represented by 700,000 people. And I don't know, does it make it more unwieldy? Do you think that like when we see a parliamentary system, it's like too many people in these, houses? I mean, 435 seems unwieldy to me. That's so many people.
But also, I mean, I think 325 million people is a lot of people too. And so kind of, if you're going to accurately, I don't know, if you're going to accurately represent a group of people, I feel like you need more people to do that. And the more people you have, the better representation you'll get. But at the same time, that does leave it open to third parties. I mean, the smaller the districts get, the easier it is for a smaller party to gain entrance into the system. And now, whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know. I think it's good. I think, so I could use some more in the House for sure.
Yeah, because it is interesting. Like, if you don't have to build a coalition of, 700,000 people to vote for you, you're going to be hard pressed to find 700,000 people that are, or half of them that are going to be wanting to vote third party. But if it was, 50,000 people, then maybe that would be much more the case.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about my favorite thing about parliamentary systems is watching clips and videos of Parliament, because I don't know if you've ever watched a clip of the House or the Senate. It is dull and boring. It's on C-SPAN and it's one person talking and it's another person answering questions, and then they vote, and they're not even all there when they vote. They kind of walk in and be like yes or no, and then it's just kind of there. It's very boring and dull. And then I go watch Parliament and I'm like, everyone's yelling at each other, everyone's screaming, everyone's cheering or booing, or I don't know what's going on. So, Peter, can you explain what happens there?
So I think that comes from the natural structure of Parliament. Because one party is in power, that party can do what they want. There's no dissenting voices in the party. Everyone votes along party lines because it's all about your rank in the party and you want to advance in the party. And if you don't vote on party lines, you're going to get reprimanded and possibly like axed from the party. So everyone votes according to party lines. So it means that if you have 51% of the seats or 50.1% of the seats, you can pass legislation and the other side can't do anything about it because you have the prime minister and you have the House. And so it gets crazy because that means that literally the other party in the House, their job is to be a dissenting voice. Their job is to just disagree. Their job is literally to disagree. Like I've read multiple articles, and that's basically what it says is everyone else's job is to be the opposition and to disagree with what the main party is doing. And so it's just crazy because you have like 15 different little parties all disagreeing and they all want to get their piece and say their piece. And show their dissatisfaction with whatever the ruling party is doing. And so it looks a little crazy. And I think British people are a lot more, they seem a lot more well-spoken, and they have better quips and one-liners than Americans do. And so that makes Parliament a lot more interesting for sure as well.
It is very entertaining to watch, for sure. The speaker, I think, is John Roberts in Britain, is hilarious to watch, and he just like roasts people and calls people out. Anyway, so much more entertaining than watching Mitch McConnell. That's all I'm gonna say.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something, I just dropped my phone. Something I was just reading was saying that in the UK in the general election, like, you don't need to have more than 50% of the vote to win the election. So something that could happen is you might have somebody get 23%, somebody get 20%, and then the last person gets like 40%, and then there's some change to other parties. But the person with 40% will still take the seat, which feels like it could also contribute to there being more multi-party, third-party winners, because if, like we said, if two of the candidates are not doing well, a third one can come in and take the seat without trying to like, oh, well, now we have to have a runoff, and now there's back to being in a 2-horse race. And
because that's how America, you have to have a majority.
So that could be another huge reason as to why we have this this two-party system in America. And something I've also heard talked about is different like voting systems. Like some people have advocated for like ranked choice, where you can put, okay, well, I want the Republican, but if I don't get the Republican, I want this Libertarian candidate, and then third place is the Democrat, and then fourth place or whatever. But I think there's pros and cons to that as well. If you guys ever thought about that or discussed that in your studies.
Yeah, I think I've read about it some. I don't know how well it would work in America. Our parties are so large and so all-encompassing on certain issues that it's very hard for there to be a third party that actually has like other
different.
Substantially different, right? Like you see Libertarian, you're like, okay, yeah, it's different, but it's definitely a wing of conservatism. And then you see a Green Party, it's like, okay, yeah, it's definitely different, but it's definitely a wing of of more liberalism. And so, and I think that's probably true in other countries as well. Like they're not like, all these crazy ideas, different ideas. They still fall on a scale. So I think it would be hard. I feel like it would have to be more like candidates. You have to have like a Bernie Sanders type, or someone who's very charismatic, can build a strong base among people, and then they're on a different party, and then you can have a ranked choice where it's like, okay, I choose this person, and now then I choose this person. I feel like just putting a party name on that wouldn't fly in America because people don't like change, if that makes sense.
Right. Well, also, I think your own party, the party you're closest to, would shoot you down and attack you. Like,
for sure.
Bernie Sanders was doing that, the Democrats would wage war on that.
Right, which doesn't help the system at all. Yeah, it doesn't help that at all, for sure.
That's wild.
Yeah, I mean, who was it? Ross Perot, who threw a little bit of a monkey wrench into the works in 2000 or whatever. So, I mean, it is possible every now and then to get someone who can pick up a fair amount of the vote. But yeah, not usually.
Yeah, I mean, Ross Perot did well, but he's still, not enough to make much of a difference. So.
Right. They call that the spoiler effect, right?
Right. And I think that's even less likely to happen now than it was in the mid-90s or whenever Perot was. So.
Although, what did Jo Jorgensen ended up getting, like a percentage, right, of the votes?
She got like 1.1%, but like Gary Johnson in 2016 picked up like 3.5% or something. Like Libertarians were really good at talking about their platform in 2016, and then they had a terrible candidate, and then this year they had a better candidate, but I didn't see any public like stuff. And it's also rough when third parties can't make it onto the debate stage and stuff like that, and get
Right.
PACs and stuff like that. So
yeah, there's a bunch of institutional roadblocks, I think.
Right. It's not just the parties. It's these other organizations and institutions that don't let a third party get in.
Exactly. Because you sort of have to, the way for the third parties to get in is for the two parties that are in charge to sort of let it happen, which
Why would they?
Feels very unlikely, right? Yeah.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's something that I remember talking about different voting voting systems in school. Like, there's a lot of different ones. Like we talked about ranked choice, or what's the other ones? I don't know. There's a few different ways that you can vote that aren't just pick your favorite. But no matter what, there's always drawbacks. And like in ranked choice, you might actually end up voting, like, even though you like a candidate better than like, let's say your second and third candidate, you actually like the second one better, but you actually put them third because you're worried about, like, the third won't actually win and stuff like that. So you put the third a little bit higher so that the second one doesn't beat the first one. So there's all these little flaws and wrinkles. There's actually there's this theorem. This is like way beyond my scope, but it's called Arrow's impossibility theorem.
Okay.
It's very mathematical. It's like written in formal logic, and I don't understand it. But all I know is that it basically shows that no matter what voting system you have, there's going to be some sort of inconsistency where people are going to be unhappy or vote in like funky ways, because like I talked about in that scenario where we put a candidate we don't actually want higher in order to sort of sabotage the system. So it's sort of rough. It's like
the most intriguing one I've seen lately is, I don't know if anyone listens to Malcolm Gladwell's podcast, Revisionist History, but he did a 2-part episode on random voting. And so basically it's a lottery system. So you would go through like a bipartisan agreement that would be like, okay, this checks this person, make sure they have the requirements, and then all these names of people that apply that want to do it are put in a hat, and then they draw out the names, and then whoever draws that's representative, and that would be true for everybody. Obviously that has its flaws.
What does that mean? What do you mean? The voters? You're drawing voters out of the hat, or
no? So like people,
representatives.
Actual representatives. So like if I wanted to run for Congress, I would be vetted and approved. I'd get my name in a hat, and then if my name is called, I'm representative now. There's no voting.
So it's not democracy. It's just a different thing.
Yes.
That's so wild.
But it's very interesting. And yeah, it was a very intriguing thing. They've done it in classrooms for like student council, and like it is really popular. Anyway, it's just worth a listen to the podcast if you want to see something that's not traditionally democratic. But it seems to work well in like, high school classrooms. I don't think it would work at all in America, but it's worth thinking about. Fun thought experiment.
Yeah.
So.
Do we have any more that we want to talk about on Parliament stuff, or do we want to talk about the Israeli Parliament case?
Yeah.
I mean,
Fill us in, Peter. Fill us in on this Israeli stuff since you've read about it.
So Israel, I don't know. You might have heard last year Israel went through an election and then another one and then another one. Like, it was just nuts. But they have what's called the Knesset, which is basically like a national assembly or a parliament. And the voting is very similar to Britain. You often don't get a party with a party that'll get like 35 to 40% maybe, and then they have to form a coalition. And so what happened with Israel was they had a bit of an issue in, I think it was 2019, starting in 2019, in April. They had their normal elections, and the two main parties, the Conservative Party and the other, I guess all the parties are relatively conservative in Israel compared to what we have in America. But the main two parties, I want to say conservative and liberal, but that's not really what they are. Anyway, the top two parties finished with like 32, 35% of the vote. And so the party that got more votes was given a mandate to form a coalition, and they have their normal like allies that they normally like make a coalition government with because they just always have to do that. But their allies didn't win enough seats, and so they couldn't hit the 50% that they needed. And so it was like, well, what do we do now? And so then they said to the second party, well, you guys try and form a coalition. And they tried to form a coalition, and they also could not reach 50%. And so, like, and so it's like, well, all right.
That means
so
no
then in
prime minister,
September,
right? Because they can't elect a prime minister without.
Well, so
majority.
Benjamin Netanyahu's still prime minister.
Right, but I mean, like,
he's just remained right. So no new prime minister, and that was also controversial because being investigated for stuff, and he couldn't stand trial while he was prime minister, and so that was also super political because he needed to win in order to not go to trial, and so anyway, so he sat there as prime minister, and they had more elections in September. Same thing happened again. So you think it was crazy having one election in America. Imagine having two in the same year, and having neither of them give you an outcome. I mean, we thought it was bad waiting like 6 days for results, and like now it's like now you're waiting 90 days for these people to try and form a coalition, and they can't.
Wow.
So then it happened a third time. They had more elections in April of this year, and the same thing happened yet again. But since this was happening during COVID in April, the top two parties were more willing to talk with each other about forming a coalition because the country was just going like crazy, and with COVID they needed like some structure, and so what they first were going to make the second party's leader like Speaker of the House or Speaker of the Knesset, and then I think they eventually decided on a alternating prime ministership. So it's really weird. They're in a coalition government, and they're rotating prime ministers between Benny Gantz and Benjamin Netanyahu.
How does that work?
I don't know. I didn't look in too much into how it worked, but I just thought this was an interesting case study into what can happen if you go into kind of a parliamentary style of voting. If you can't hit that 50%, you can't form a coalition. It's crazy.
Yeah, that was my question. I wonder if when they were writing this structure, coming up with the structure, if they ever thought about, well, what happens if we just don't figure this out?
Right.
Is that because of the polarization there, or if it's because they didn't want to work together? I presume polarization because that's the world right now. But
right. So it's polarization. I think there's like the two main parties. There's also a lot of like religious stuff that goes on in Israel, because you have not only do you have Arab parties and stuff like that, like ethnic stuff, but then you also have like more conservative Jews and more liberal Jews, and so it kind of splits there too. And so they have different ideas about what laws should be there. Should we be observing traditional Jewish laws as like the laws of the land or not? Kind of things like that, which splits them. And when there's too many like fringe parties, or like parties that neither party likes, that's when the problem comes in, because now you can't ally with enough people. You can't bring enough people under your tent to reach 50%. And I think that's what happened there.
Yeah, it's one of those weird scenarios where the third party or plural parties are not really that popular, but they're just enough to play spoiler and like hold the carrot on the string. Or wild. That's really interesting.
I just wonder, like, so do they vote? I'm assuming they vote by party, right?
Yeah.
So it's interesting to think the voters, like, are they just voting the same way every time and just hoping for a different result? Like,
it was different. So it flipped. So from the first election, Netanyahu's party won by 1 seat. Okay. In the second election, Benny Gantz's party won by 1 seat. And then in the third election, I don't know who won. I think Netanyahu won again by like a seat or two. But it kind of flips back and forth a little bit.
That means that there are people that are like, oh, I'll vote for the other one, so we'll let them win. And then the same people on the other side that thought the exact same. They're like, I'm gonna vote.
Right.
Yeah, I have it up in front of me, Peter. So in the first election, it was how do you say it, Likud?
Yep.
They got it first, and then in the second one in September, blue and white won, and then the third one, Likud won more seats than Blue and White.
Right, which is
so it went flipped both times.
Yep, wild.
Right.
So wild. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's crazy. I mean, yeah, I don't know. Like this kind of reminds me a little bit, if I can just throw it back to Britain. Like if you know Britain with the whole Brexit thing, they've had 3 elections in the last like 5 years as well.
Right.
Mainly around Brexit, because in 2017 Theresa May was trying to pass Brexit legislation, and she had like a 2-seat over the 325 or 326 that she needed. She was like 1 seat over, but she felt like that wasn't enough of a mandate, to do Brexit stuff, and she thought the country was really behind Brexit, and so she called for a snap election, which is just like you can just call for it as long as Parliament votes for it. And so they voted for a snap election, and she ended up losing 9 seats. And so they went from having a majority.
Yep.
Yeah, it's nuts. I mean, they went from having a majority to now they had to ally with a smaller party,
right,
and lead a minority government. And they made a confidence and supply agreement. And what is a confidence and supply agreement with the smaller party? It basically means the smaller party can vote however they want on any issue, but if a vote of no confidence comes up, they have to vote with the party so that the Conservative Party can maintain power. And so it's like you can vote however you want. So it means that the Conservative Party can't pass any legislation because they don't have a majority, but they also can't get voted out because they have a majority when it comes to a vote of no confidence. And I'm like, this is just like, you're talking about gridlock. That's gridlock right there.
Yeah, no kidding.
This is when I'm like, okay, maybe America isn't so bad off, because I definitely see the advantage though, like to just bring it back to like the differences, like, because if there is a president of a different party than what happens in Congress, like there's obviously a gridlock there because the president can veto and then just nothing happens, right? Whereas in a parliamentary system, you'd hope that since you have the prime minister on your side, if you have a majority, you can pass all of these things. But then you get scenarios like this that I'm just like, I don't, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, no kidding.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, we could definitely keep talking about more of this, but I was wondering, like, from pros and cons, thinking about Congress to Parliament, what are our thoughts?
I mean, I think pro of Parliament is that we can have more parties. Like, I mean, we have more ideas. There's more voices heard. Like, you feel better with your vote, I guess, even though you're not voting for a person, which is, I guess, a con. I think you're voting for a party, but like, there's at least more ideas on the table potentially. So I think that's a pro.
Right. I think, I don't know, it's a pro and a con depending on how you look at it, but there's less gridlock in a parliamentary system unless you get that scenario we just mentioned, because you can always pass legislation. And so it basically means, that's nice because you're always passing stuff, you're always progressing. Me as a conservative, I don't like that. I like gridlock because it means that we conserve what we have and we're not constantly changing things. But some people like, that way of doing things. And it also means that every election is a mandate on this party because this party had full control. And so you can't hide behind, we didn't have the House and we couldn't get our agenda done. So just vote for us and give us the House, then we'll get our agenda done. Like, they can't hide behind that. And so I think that's nice because there is some responsibility there.
Right. Something that Jared said made me look up a little statistic. So I was curious if, having a parliamentary system, having more parties, leads to people feeling more inclined to vote because they might be able to find a party that still agrees with them. But interestingly enough, I'm looking at something on Statista.com. It's looking at the voter turnout in the UK. So it says in 2019, voter turnout is 67.3% of eligible voters. And it looks like it's kind of been fluctuating over the last 50 years, where it's usually around 70, a little bit over 70% earlier, and then kind of coming down later. And it's about the same in the US, actually. Like, it's always kind of around 60-70% of eligible voters vote.
Right.
So it does seem like there's not a huge difference between the two.
Yeah.
But it does. I still agree with what you say, that like that's definitely a pro, like being able to have. More
It definitely
than one
feels
option.
on an intellectual level like there's more. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, people vote, but might not necessarily be happy about like who they vote.
Right.
Right. That the reasons for voting may be different in the different systems, because I feel like here it's like so partisan that it's like I'm voting against the other side.
Exactly.
Whereas in a parliamentary system, who's the other side? Because there's like 50 other sides.
Right.
And so it's like you can't really, I don't know, but I feel like it would make it more about what are we standing for rather than voting against other people. And I feel like that's maybe a little bit healthier. But
I definitely feel like that's a more modern trend, though, in America. Like, that hasn't been the case for a lot of our history. But I mean, it is an issue now, so it's worth mentioning for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely think a pro of the system we have in the U.S. is having like regular elections that aren't able to just be called at any time. Like, I feel like there's too much instability from just being able to call a snap election. And I feel like even economically speaking, the markets must hate that. Just like, oh, we're having an election now, down go the markets. Yeah. Although I have maybe it's the opposite, who knows, but that's super fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, on paper, I don't know how, like, again, I haven't studied parliamentary system enough, but I think a pro of America, I really like the system of the House and the Senate working together versus this weird House of Commons, House of Lords. Like, that seems very strange. But, you know, that seems like a pro to me. Am I wrong, Peter?
Yeah. I mean, sure. I mean, you said
I think you cut out a bit.
Together, they don't seem to work. I do think the system that we have in America of checks and the judiciary and the executive and the legislature, and splitting it all up, and then having three, just the executive, and then also just the House and the Senate, kind of splitting that all up. It does give it more opportunity for gridlock, which I think I like. But like I said, it's because I'm conservative. It's not. I don't like to see change, and so I know that there are a lot of people that don't like that and they hate that.
Right. Yeah, I noticed, Peter, when we were doing some research, some of the Huffington Post articles you sent had like this terrible view on gridlock, and I was thinking the same thing as you. I was like, I like it when the government shuts down every now and then. Like, I don't mind that. Let's take a break, slow down.
Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah.
I think that's part of the reason they put checks and balances there, is that, hey, every now and then it's going to take you a while to get stuff done.
I think that's one of the things. It's like the founders intended for things to take their time. Like, it was never supposed to be, which is why I think a lot of people have issues with like executive orders and those kinds of things, because they're much more instantaneous. Stuff was meant to take their time, so you can deliberate on it, so you can discuss it, so you can figure it out, so you could go through all these different systems, and if it needs to go to the judiciary. Like, there's lots of different steps along the way, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah,
to make sure we get stuff good passed.
Right. Yeah, they had a very negative view of like this mob rule gets swept up in something, and all of a sudden, like that's a very traditional view of democracy as like a pure democracy where people vote. There was this, going back to the Greeks and Romans, that democracy is just like anarchy, and it's just tyranny of the mob, where all of a sudden people get swept up and they vote really emotionally. And that's I think a big reason of why America is structured as a republic to begin with, is that sort of temperament that slows things down. And if something needs to get changed, it takes time to elect an official, and then they take time, and policies take time, and it's quite the slow process. That can be a pro or con depending on which way you look at government.
Right.
All right. Anything
Yeah.
else?
Closing thoughts.
I
This was
think
good. I learned a lot.
yeah. I think just hearing the differences and like, I think it gives me both an appreciation for other forms of government and like things that we could implement or like talk about working on,
Yeah.
but also appreciation for our own, and happy that we're not Israel having 3 elections in 1 year.
Seriously. And I do think that one day we could have, third or more parties start to creep in America, but it will be challenging. It will take some structural changes probably on like how debates are run, how funding is done, and
Mm-hmm.
how you get your name on the ballot and all of these rules. But, it feels like if people get fed up enough with the 2 main parties, we could start to see House elections go to third party or independents. And then, that's a big critique of the Libertarian Party is like, quit focusing on this like presidential election that spoils it for one candidate, and focus on local races, which may or may not be a fair criticism, but that's something that I see much more likely. It's being like, okay, yeah, maybe we will see some
Right.
more disenfranchised House districts vote third party or something like that. But yeah, it's challenging. There's no doubt.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting, like, also when we talk about these 2 parties, like, our 2 parties in America aren't set in stone either. Like, they're constantly changing. You look through our history, there's usually 2 parties, but they're, have changed positions on lots of different things. So
absolutely,
it's not just, we're stuck with one thing or the other. They definitely fluctuate. So.
Yep. All right. Well, it was, I'm going to give a quick recommendation. I'd like to say on the behalf of all of us, I know Peter and I are a big fan. I think Jared likes this recommendation too.
I do
maybe
like
less
it, yes.
than Peter.
Probably less than y'all, but yes.
Okay, so this week we are recommending the game Among Us. It's very popular, so you're probably hearing this being like, well, everyone's playing Among Us, but not everyone. So Among Us is a game that you can play on via Steam or as an app on your phone. And you basically, it's kind of like playing Mafia, if you've ever played that in real life, or as a card game where you have a couple people that are like the imposters or the killers or whatever. And then you're all little 2D people on a screen. I should probably just share.
It's more like Murder in the Dark. Than it.
Yeah, Murder in the Dark. But I feel like most people don't know what that is.
Fair.
But go ahead.
But yeah, and then there's lots of, so basically it's gamified, and then if you're a crew member, you're like the part of the good guys. You're running around doing tasks, trying to figure out who the villain is. That screen sharing is not correct at all.
Oh, I was sharing the wrong.
It's just a nice bar of gold and black.
Really? Weird.
Yep.
All right, let me try again.
Peter, did you see the screen share correctly?
Yeah, I saw what you saw.
Okay.
Is this better?
Ah, yes.
That's better.
Great. So yeah, this is the logo Among Us. Might be ringing a bell. There's been a lot of good memes, stuff like that.
Yes.
Trying to find like a good action shot of people playing. But yeah, you basically have you're on a little ship together. You're trying to do tasks to fix the ship up, and if the crewmates all complete task on time, there's a winner. They all win together, but there's 2 people that are secretly imposters who are trying to murder off all of the crewmates before the crewmates can either fix all the ship or
catch
vote out. Yeah, vote out the imposters. So it's really fun. It's very cheap. If you have a PC, you can download it for like $5 and play it with your friends. It's really good COVID game in my opinion, because like it's socially distant and whatever. We've been enjoying that, even though I'm in Virginia and Peter and Jared are in Texas. We've been able to play a lot, which has been great.
Yeah,
what was the other thing I was going to say? Oh, if you have a Mac, you can figure out ways to get it on Mac. It just takes a little bit more digging around. Let's put
a little
it
bit more effort. Yeah,
but it can be done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely recommend.
Yeah, a lot of fun. Hit us up. We'll play with you.
Yes, for sure. All right. Well, Peter, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes,
and
Peter,
giving
was
us
an
your
honor.
knowledge and doing research, and we appreciate it. Always fun to have guests on.
Yeah.
We've been Critical Conversations. You can find us on Facebook and YouTube and Pocket Casts and all of the places podcasts are found, Spotify, whatever else. Be sure to give us a subscribe on YouTube and a like on Facebook. That would be great. Tell your friends about the show. Tell your parents when you're home for Thanksgiving so they can get mad at two 20-somethings talking about politics. So it'll be great.
There you go.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. And yeah, thanks again, Peter.
Yep.
Yep.
See you guys next week.
See you next week.